Yeah. They're just.
I'm just being a whiny. Whatever.
Princess.
Sure.
Do not. You have to be careless. It's an insult. I haven't had that one. All right, it's 5:30. Let's bring this meeting to order. This is the regular meeting of the City of Harbor Springs, Michigan Planning Commission. It's Thursday, June 20th, 5:30 local time. And Jeff, would you please call roll?
Absolutely. Vanessa Warren,
Here.
Emily Dubé,
Here.
Bob Thoma.
Here.
Tony Johnson,
Here.
Bill Mulder,
Here.
Barry Leskard,
Here.
Nancy Rondell.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Mark Boudet says he's on the way. He's taking turns on two wheels to get here. So I will look to see him. All right, first thing on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our looking back, April 18th meeting.
I move to approve the minutes.
We have a motion, or is there any discussion or corrections? We have a motion and a second.
Is Bob the second?
All in favor of approving the minutes from the April 18th meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting minutes are approved. And let's see, next thing on the agenda is public comment and correspondence. And this is the part where people can tell us what's on your mind for 3 succinct minutes. And it's for things that are not on the agenda tonight. So if you have something that you think we ought to know about, think about, et cetera, now's the time.
I'll just introduce myself. My name is Kristen Baylog. I'm the Executive Director at the Harbor Springs Area Historical Society. And I just see a lot of unfamiliar faces. So I'm here to answer any questions that you might have about our current efforts in the community. And specifically, I think we're going to look at the Shea locomotive today. So I just wanted to put a face with that.
Yes, so I guess to tag along that, thanks, Kristen. I'd like to ask the planning commission to add this location of a locomotive at Shea Park. Just for a quick input from the planning commission to recommend council any ideas or suggestions about locating the locomotive at Shea Park. This was something that came up to us pretty quickly. We went to council on Monday, went to the Parks Board on Tuesday, and the council's holding a special meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. And Parks Board and council generally have positive things to say about it, but I thought it'd be wise just to get planning commission's input on it. And so I request to put that on first on the agenda, if that's okay.
Members, are you in agreement to discuss the locomotive first thing on the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. You have our agree? And let's close out public comment though. Any comments and anybody online? 3 people online, nobody's raising their hand. Okay, let's get into the,
Did I hear a motion to amend the agenda?
I move to amend the agenda. I'll second that.
we have a motion and a second to amend the agenda to add the discussion of the Shea locomotive first thing under new and old business. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. And let's get into the Shea locomotive.
Great, okay, so let me share this. All right, so for, years at this point, the Historical Society has been, looking to acquire, which they have, a locomotive that was, built similar to, Ephraim Shea's design. And this one was built in 1907, and they acquired it, and then they've been discussing and, pondering ideas of where to place it. So several years ago, 3 years ago, we placed a hot boat at Shea Park. And at that time, it was discussed possibly of acquiring a locomotive that could also potentially be located at Shea Park. When we approved a hot boat at Shea Park, it was really for just recommendation. At that time, the planner had determined that, it's administrative review, but it would be a good idea to get just planning commission input on locating it in this location, really. So this kind of came on, kind of quickly that the council called a special meeting for tomorrow after Parks discussed it on Tuesday. So there wasn't really a time to amend the agenda because we put the agenda out on Monday. So sorry for the late notice on this, but it has gone through the Parks Board and it has gone to council once. This actually been to the Parks Board twice now. So this is just an example of what it used to look like, the locomotive. It's being refurbished at Moran Iron Works in Sheboygan area, well, side area. And it's almost completed. It should be complete soon. And the Historical Society is proposing locating it roughly in this location. The Parks Board had made a recommendation to shift it slightly southwest by 6 feet. So that, of course, would need to be right now. This photo showing it roughly about 30 feet from the streets on each side, or from the border on each side, property lines. And so the Parks Board was to recommend to go with it, but to shift it slightly southwest. Well, of course, we'll have staff take a look at the precise location to make sure there's no issues, but our zoning code, even though we don't necessarily have to follow our zoning code at being a city property, we try to, and the setbacks there is 20 feet. The AHA is 20 feet from there, so this we anticipate needs to stay 20 feet too, and it will be. So I don't see an issue with the setbacks.
So
Why did
go ahead.
why did they ask to have it moved to the southwest? What was their thing?
Oh, no, the Parks Board.
Yes.
I think from talking with Rachel, the intent was to try and keep it as tucked into the corner as possible to provide as much open space in the middle of the property as possible for future uses.
Yeah, to keep more center green space. That was my understanding. I don't know if Kristen, you were at the meeting, but
That is correct.
yeah. And there's two things. So they're proposing the locomotive, and then in a year or two, if they have the funds, to potentially also add a pavilion over to protect it. This sort of, it doesn't have to necessarily this exact model, but something there to cover it and protect it. And you see this one's examples of the dimensions are there.
Will the locomotive be on tracks?
Yes.
Yes,
There's
this
some more
next-
pictures.
yeah. This next slide shows that there'd be tracks there. And then,
And will there be a sidewalk to it, a connecting sidewalk from the existing sidewalk?
Not in our, we did not tackle any of the infrastructure plans like that. We did take into consideration that accessibility for ADA purposes. And similarly to the AHA, so that is a flat surface for getting in and out, but we have not gone into that detail with the Parks Board at this time. Rachel and I have had conversations about that, so it's not that we're not realizing it, but that's not part of this phase.
and it was discussed also when we put the AHA in the Shea Park about whether or not to have sidewalks, and it was kind of also in walking paths. It was, I think at that time, they wanted to have a more holistic view of what was gonna happen at the park before they decided to put any kind of walking paths throughout the park. So this plan doesn't include sidewalks, but I don't think it's necessarily, we don't have a sidewalk on the south side here. And as these three spots are actually, these parking spots are actually spots that are utilized by food trucks or food vendors in the summertime. So it's sometimes it could cause a little congestion there and there's no sidewalk. So those are some things that I think we should think about at the city level about adding sidewalks. And that of course could be, adding sidewalks or paths down the road could be something that planning commission, recommends to council. If that's how you feel that we should have that there.
Victor, with the shifted location south and west, exactly to be determined, would in any case it be within the 20-foot setbacks?
I don't think we would allow, propose anything would be in the 20-foot setbacks.
So for tonight, we can figure it will be within.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know who to ask.
Yeah.
You? Yeah.
I'll take it.
Okay. Is this gonna be fenced? Or will kids like me be able to climb on it?
Well, we don't have plans of fencing it in, much like the one that is exhibited in Cadillac. And we've had several of our trustees have actually gone around the country and done a Shea tour of many, many displayed Shays, some of which are actually functioning and riding. And no, at this time, we don't plan that. However, to your point, we do have a walk around space. So working with Lucas on the best, what is good for maintenance for them for upkeep. And we were fortunate to have some of the track come back with the locomotive from its location in Nacogdoches, Texas. And the students at the Industrial Arts Institute have repaired those tracks and filled in the gaps to create the length that we need. And so in the display on the grounds, the site preparation, there will be a cement walk around the property before and after the pavilion is erected. And we do have a goal to have that pavilion completed within 2 years. We are just shy of our goal for that phase.
I like the idea that it's user friendly.
It's user friendly. It's a teaching tool for all of us.
Did you get in the cab or whatever?
Right,
Yeah, okay.
so during Shea Days, we'll be in our 27th year of celebrating Shea Days in Shea Park. And so this obviously will be a highlight of Shea Days and how we can utilize it in that capacity. So we have a new wood cab coming, which takes it back to its original state. And that is being designed so that you can have a picture of yourself taken in the engineer's seat. It's meant to be safe and participatory.
Is the pavilion necessary to protect it from the elements?
It's,
Yes.
yes,
So I'm Vince Mahalik. I'm the past president of the Historical Society. Yes, we actually have to have a pavilion with the wooden cab. Obviously, metal locomotives are in the weather all the time,
Yeah.
but keep in mind, they also have maintenance crews who keep up after
Yeah.
it. In our case, we need to cover it. We don't want to have to keep restoring it every couple of years.
And I don't know if it's just the rendering of it, but is there any way to make it a little higher so it's not covering up a lot of, because it looks like if you're driving by, you would struggle to see what it
It's a
looks
great
like.
question because the balance is some people don't want it to be too high.
Right,
And so when we finally design the pavilion, we'll try to answer both of those questions. Enough angle on the roof that we can slide snow off,
got
but
it.
at the same time, not make it too tall.
And so I think that's a good point, Barry, because if you're coming from on Main Street, you're driving by, you're up higher, so you're gonna see more roof than you are gonna see.
Right.
But coming from Bay Street, you're gonna see it level, so.
Right.
So that's a good point.
your goals are the same as ours
Yeah.
as far as the, the curb appeal and the wow factor, as well as just the protection
Yeah.
of the restoration. Which is why on the samples that the slides with the pavilion
Yep.
picture in it, I have talked to several designers with regard to matching some of the architecture to be in liking with the depot that still exists in our town. And you can see the different pavilions where there's a horizontal bar on the bottom left, and then there's the more architecturally pleasing one with the arch shape. There's obviously a price difference there,
Yeah,
but it lets you see more of the locomotive.
no, and that's great that you took into consideration the depot and how the aesthetics are with that, so. that's-
And just finishing up the whole site, working with Rachel to, finish up the park once the locomotive gets in place. Then working with the park board and sharing the story and how we can do walking without interfering with green space, but more, interpretive panels that talk about the waterworks and what happened in that property, which we're going to be doing a lot of in the restoration of the Shea House. And so we have exhibit panels in the Shea House that refer out the window to Shea Park. So they're gonna be working fluidly.
I think it would be, because we're not rushing to get the pavilion in, I think it might be good in the future point to bring concepts to the pavilion that you might be considering back to the planning commission, so you can get that site there. And you can get their recommendations at council, but I think it would be good maybe to see, those different rendering viewpoints. Just a thought, it's gonna be 1 to 2 years out. But it's up to the planning commission, of course. If it matters that much to you guys.
I will
That should-
look for your guidance on
Okay.
what order to do that in. Obviously, we'll work with Parks and Rec and we'll go from there. I think it's great. The more people who see it and get their questions answered, the more successful this can be for everyone in the community.
Yeah, I think it's a great project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me catch Mark up. Mark, hi.
My apologies.
No problem. So what we're doing, we're discussing the recommendation to place the restored Shea locomotive in Shea Park. And the Historic Society is ready to get down to it here. And so they're asking us for our recommendation, and that's we added this to the agenda, so that's why you're seeing this for the first time. And Victor, could you clarify, strictly speaking, what do you need from the planning commission?
I would probably need some consensus recommendations to the council about what your, I guess, any input you have. So what I heard basically here was like 2 inputs. Was one, consider sidewalks or pathways in the park. And then the second one was to kind of consider the height of the pavilion and the shape of it to accommodate different views. So that's what I heard. So I think input like that to the council, because council is going to make the final decision tomorrow. This is a decision for council to make, just as they did with the Shea Park. Just as they did with the AHA vote, we came with the AHA to the planning commission just to get, again, input from planning commission to advise council. So it's more of an advisory, just like the Parks Board advised council on this.
And just in terms of our nuts and bolts, we don't envision the height of the peak of the pavilion being higher than our height allowance.
Our height
25
is
feet.
40 feet in the commercial properties.
Pardon me?
40 feet is the height limit in commercial, I'm sorry, in community properties.
40 feet.
Yeah, so.
Rachel indicated that,
On the water side of this is our building at Irish. And so whatever they do, it's not gonna block any view because we're right there blocking the world.
In fact, that was part of, Lucas helped us pick this spot, and part of it was, we're up against the Irish.
How tall is the locomotive itself?
It's 35 feet long. It's actually the inner circle.
How tall is it?
how tall is it?
I didn't know. It's not very tall.
17 feet, yeah.
Yeah, it's not very tall.
All right.
And it'll
So-
be up a little bit on tracks, but not substantial.
6, 8 inches.
Rachel indicated that the overall height of the pavilion may be between 20 to 25 feet, depending on style and design that they pick.
And again, all we're advising on tonight is the locomotive itself, which is way less than 40 feet.
So there is no
There's no specific on.
No specific height limit for accessory, but for the primary principal building on a community district property, it's 40 feet, 3 stories.
40 on community.
Nothing in there about locomotive.
Nothing there about any kind of accessory building. Because of course, these are community properties with city buildings, city infrastructure. But there is no height limit, but I would definitely advise not going above
Yeah.
what the maximum height is allowed for a principal building.
And there wouldn't be any reason to,
No.
if it was a locomotive under 20. There would.
All right. Yeah, so in terms of our nuts and bolts and measurements and dimensions, it sounds like it fits. Yeah, Tony.
Kristen and Vince, just interested into actually Vince, you might have mentioned this already, the location selection. When I saw this in the council packet last week, I'm like, that's an interesting spot. I was thinking, it might have been kind of more mirroring the AHA in that back corner there. If you could just help us understand, and maybe you already have the selection location.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually walked the property with Lucas. There are issues. So the reason he picked this spot was there was originally a cistern for the waterworks. Not the waterworks, for Shea Locomotives building in this corner. And under there is he said, a wall that's about 6 feet wide and goes down about 16 feet. He said, you don't want to be digging in that area at all. I prefer you not to go into that corner. So he wanted us to stay away from the mature trees, and he pushed it in this corner. We also talked about putting it along the fence that now is with Demmer's property, but it would be behind the trees, and he did not want to take the trees out. So he suggested, he thought that maximizing the green space would be put it in the southwest.
Also, Kristen,
Right.
you brought something else.
And the
up.
real story is,
Yes.
that's where the train tracks actually were historically. So when you come into our exhibits and you see, there's a very well-known image of the Shea House from Bay Street looking north. And that is on the train, which is why the depot is there. And so it actually, where the cars are parked right now was the train tracks.
Right.
So it was historically accurate as well. The gallery, the southeast gallery of the Shea House is dedicated to the Shea locomotive. So that while they're standing in there, learning a little bit more about that, they're looking out at the locomotive.
Okay.
So it kind of all came together without any, conflicting plans. And it lends itself to the broadest green space, working with Rachel at Parks.
Victor, what are you looking for from us?
A recommendation to council on any
Put a stamp.
suggestions.
You want to put a stamp on this and say, we like it?
Well, yeah, with your recommendations. So I heard your recommendations so far, basically was. And I mentioned
Just-
part-
Yeah, I think it's a great location. I think it's a great use of the space. I think it makes the park very intentional now. So with that, I think it needs to be more user friendly. It needs to be more accessible. It needs to be more, we need to stop the hodgepodginess.
Yeah.
We gotta make it more formal.
I agree with that. That was gonna be my comment. I think it's a great project. All for it. But, and I apologize if this has been talked about already, but has there been any type of planning for this park by the city or any?
Well, I know the Parks Board they do mention it in the Parks plan and they are.
I mean, as far as an actual plan, that's something that, I mean.
They're just- they're just-
That's something
So
that
I'm
needs to
following
be.
up with that comment, is that it'd be nice, I mean, I understand why you put it there, makes all the sense in the world. But what happens with the rest of the spaces? And to make it more intentional, make it more user friendly, obviously, there's a direction that's been chosen, which I support, doesn't really bother me. But it seems like there's just a lot of potential there that needs to be developed in some way. And I would suggest, along with, if we all like this type of thing, that we also add that we would suggest, it'd be nice to see some actual planning done for this park. Long-term park planning.
I would say, there have been ideas, but none of them have been formulated into plans. So for example, I remember maybe 4 years ago, there was, ideas thrown about putting a pavilion in the center of the park. And then there was,
Yeah.
people talking about the green space. So that kind of was Nick. So then we talked about when we put the AHA in there, the boat was about having walking paths. They've been mentioned, but there hasn't been no plan. So I think it's a good idea for the council and the Parks Board to
Yeah, I'd just like to see that become more of a priority perhaps, but yeah, I think this is another step in the right direction, but then it's gonna be a third thing, a fourth thing, and
Yeah, I think
then it's gonna start looking hodgepodge.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if it were actually,
It's gonna
Plan.
look hodgepodge as soon as the locomotive goes in there, if you don't start connecting people and having
And space.
connectivity and if you can get a master plan, you can use that as marketing, you can take it even further.
I think
So-
it started like, the adding things there started probably about 6, 7 years ago. Many of these trees are just new trees that were planted 6 or 7 years ago. So it was, it was a green space with a couple of mature trees and then let's add trees and then Historical Society proposed just let's add it. So I think that's valid. It's a very good point to let's have a.
Emily, do you have any thoughts?
I agree with like a lot of the comments that have been made. I love that something historic is coming, that people are gonna be able to utilize and see and get more history about the city. I do agree with having a plan for the park. I think it would be nice to know what's gonna come, so it isn't hodgepodge. And I like that corner, and then I think it was Tony mentioned about like mimicking the boat. I know it's how the train tracks ran, but I was thinking if it ran on an angle, kind of like the boat, and if other things came, in there, it would, then you could flow around in like an octagonal shape or whatever. But I think it'd be such a nice feature to add, so, yeah.
I think these folks have put in a tremendous amount of planning and forethought to get where they are. And I'm content that they let you take the lead. If that's where you think it should be, I'm good with
And
that.
our plan, Rachel and I have talked into all the comments that you're making. I agree that it's not finished. We're developing a historical corridor. I'm gonna try to wrap up the Shea House, wrap up that locomotive. We wrapped up the AHA. And the finishing touches, there's definitely another layer that needs to bring it together. And a lot of times that will come in the interpretive panels that are added to the park. And I believe that Rachel and I need to really sit down and look at what that can be once we get the locomotive in its position, and then spend some time on that space and create that story. We need to finish the story. So we know at Shea Park as locals, the big green sign tells us that it's on the National Register of Historic Places. That National Register of Historic Places includes the Shea House. So it's the panel which is part of what the museum is going to tell in the Shea House of how they connect. But I agree with you all that we need to connect it on the landscaping and visually on the exterior as well. So thank you for that
I
comment.
was wondering if you have any thoughts or comments.
I kind of agree with Mark and Vanessa. When I take a look at it, it's like you're developing a historical park. Put it in context, if you've ever been to Greenfield Village, that has a collection of historic buildings. The reason why it makes sense is because there was a master plan and everything is connected. So I kind of agree with some of the planning commission is that great use of the park, but I think the park needs to have a master plan with the intent of developing it into a cultural and historic park for the community to really give it the context that's needed.
That it deserves.
Yeah, that it deserves, yeah.
Great. Barry, Nancy, any final thoughts?
I agree with him. I think we need some master plans for parks, but this one in particular. I just think it makes sense.
The parks take into consideration the Detmers, I know they're building a new structure.
Yeah.
As far as kind of foliage and things like that to kind of block out some of that. I don't know if that's been taken into consideration also.
There's some lot line stuff there.
there's a lot line thing.
There's a lot line thing there.
Okay,
Actually, their landscaping is on our property.
okay. So we do have an
City's
agreement,
property, so
a written agreement with
Yeah.
them that a couple of years ago, we might
Yeah.
have passed. I don't know if you were approached at all or talked to Demers, but I think there's these trees eventually and this will eventually grow.
and
Right.
I think we've taken care of what we need to for the neighbors because we've already done some negotiating down there about
Cool.
that.
All right, so
So
it's,
I did talk to Ed Demmer about the locomotive, Victor, in the past. he was actually very supportive of it. And at the time, we were thinking of putting it by the mature trees.
Yeah.
But Lucas talked me out of that. I was trying to do it sort of on an angle across from the AHA.
Yeah, I was gonna have the same angle, but right here, I remember that.
Yes, exactly.
All right, well, it sounds like the planning commission is generally in favor of this plan. I believe there were three recommendations to ask council to think about, and they were,
One was to consider, well, I think the first one could be kind of merged with the third one, is like having sidewalks and paths, merge that with having a create a sort of plan, master plan for Shea Park.
okay,
And the second one is to consider the height and size and angle of the pavilion.
okay. So do we need a?
Yeah, I would say make a motion to make those recommendations to council for their consideration.
Okay,
I'll make a motion that we do whatever it is we have to do, I guess. That we recommend to city council that this is an okay deal.
With those two
The
recommendations.
way it is.
with those two recommendations.
Yeah.
All right, we have a.
And if there's ever a master plan that includes this being someplace else, would we have a conversation about moving it?
We could, it's gonna be, it's a heavy thing.
Well, that does bring
The
up.
master plan would.
Well, that does bring up a good point, and this is something that we'll have to talk about, maybe even at the council, more the council, but, agreement about locating these. I don't know if we have one about the how, but, 50 years from now, are these still here? Who's responsible for maintenance, all these things. So those are things we probably have to
Right.
have some agreements eventually about. So I think we'll talk about that at council more, but,
We're prepared for that. Rachel talked to me
Yeah.
about that.
okay, yeah, just,
Yeah, I think ask about maintenance at council.
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, we have a motion on the table and a second to,
Who seconded
support-
that?
Pardon?
Who seconded it?
Second.
Yeah.
Oh, Nancy seconding, yep. Any further discussion?
And the pavilion will sit on a pad, a concrete pad.
We're again working with Lucas on, different preferences that he has but the drawings represent what that.
Also, they may have footings that go deeper and then the pads pull around.
You got it.
Want a roll call?
We can do that.
Yes.
Nancy Rondell.
Yes.
Barry Lustgarten.
Yes.
Mark Bedek. Yes. Bill Mulder.
Yes.
Tony Johnson.
Yes.
Bob Philip.
Yes.
Emily DeVay.
Yes.
Vanessa Warren.
Yes.
Can I just clarify, this is just to recommend to council, so I can vote here. and
Yes,
tomorrow.
yes, yeah.
Okay.
No, it's usually on the same zoning or
Yeah,
specific site
I
plan.
just wanted to
issue.
make sure, because
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. And so if anyone's interested, tomorrow at 10 a.m., we do have a special council meeting just to discuss this specific topic. So.
we're just gonna put cots in.
Great. Congrats. Congrats, you guys, and
Thank you.
congrats on all the hard work. Thank you. Okay, if you need to leave, don't feel bad. No one will take offense.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right. Next thing on the agenda is the signage ordinance. And Jeff, can you set the stage for us here about why we're looking at this?
Because we need to. So we wrapped up the zoning code. Part of that process was we're pulling the signage language out of the zoning code. We're gonna move that to an ordinance that would be just a police power as part of the city code. So I think we've worked out many of the details with our subcommittee. We still have some more work to do. But what I did is I went throughout downtown and I took pictures of every storefront. Shared that with Becky with the DDA, had some discussions, and I put together a little bit of a slideshow of some of those pictures I took to provide kind of an opportunity to look at what we currently have going on downtown. One of the things that we've been discussing is addressing signage in windows as a percentage of coverage for that window. And so two of the things that I looked at was outdoor display of goods, because we've been discussing that. And then the signage in windows and whatnot, kind of as a holistic look at what's going on at storefronts downtown. So let me start off with briefly, did I say just signage? Signage. So we can probably skip through these first few slides. But there is some information in here about outdoor display of goods, should people like to look at that.
You do have the signs and then,
Yeah, some of them do.
well, I think they're hard to see
If you can go to, we have the second,
definition.
yeah. Okay. So I did include some information regarding definitions of signs to kind of provide us some background there of what we consider signage. Specifically, what we have in here right now at this point is a placeholder of signage within window areas of 15% of the window. So we have some of our downtown stores. So example, if we go to the next page there, yeah, so Turkey's Cafe and the next door are great examples. This is probably very close. I apologize. It was difficult to get pictures of the windows without much glare. But these are good examples of signage within the windows that are probably very close to that 15%, where they have somewhere near the middle of the window, the name of their business, and then near the bottom of the window, a little ribbon or banner with some further, information about it. That probably is, in compliance, and a lot of the downtown businesses are similar to that. The challenge is when, if we go to the realtor page, yeah. The challenge is when we get to some other types of businesses other than retail stores or clothing stores. Some businesses are occupying a substantially different percentage of their window with their displays. And we did have an opinion from our city attorney that the realtor sheets and things like that are right up in close proximity to the glass that are designed to being shown to people outside of the storefront, that is considered signage, and that we do need to take it into consideration. Also in discussion with John Icoangeli, we had some further ideas about, can we have different language based on the type of business, based on their use? And specifically, that's something that we can't do. There's some court decisions that basically tell us that we have to treat our signage equally, and we can't look at the content of that sign to make those determinations. So essentially, when we come up with a percentage of window coverage, that needs to apply evenly to all of our businesses downtown.
And if I could add just really quick, Jeff, and I mentioned this at the DDA, and I don't know what John's thoughts are on it, but we also have language in our city code and the CBD that the businesses have to maintain some level of ground floor transparency. And if your windows are covered up with signs, is that ground floor transparency? And ground floor transparency is essentially you have 20% of your storefront that people can see through and look inside. The goal is to make it more inviting downtown. I think that's part of the rule for that. So that's something to consider about if you have, in addition to the percentage of that we're looking at. So
Very much so. And I think that would be considered when looking at the storefronts and the glass that they have and not covering up too much of the glass. But then also, if a new storefront was to be built, that we would want to see windows and glass in it as opposed to, no way to see into the store. So that's just, ideas and things to keep in mind when looking at this and coming up with what we come up with. And we will want to reach out to more of the business owners as we get into this, as we get a better idea of what we want to do, to make sure that everybody understands how this will affect their business and what they can do for signage. Realistically, for the most of our signage code, what we've been looking at will remain very similar to what we currently have. Percentage of window coverage has been the one thing that is going to require probably a little bit more discussion beyond what we've previously done, unless of course we have ideas that we would like to change some of our other language regarding signage. John, do you have
Are
anything
you
else?
suggesting that that you would go down to Tom Graham and tell him he can't do that anymore? Is that what you're saying? And the other realtors?
What I'm saying is that whatever regulations we come up with, we have to apply evenly to all storefronts. So if we say to Tom Graham or any of the other realtors that percentage of window coverage is acceptable, we're also saying that percentage of window coverage for all other businesses is acceptable as well. So what level of storefront clutter on the glass stuff do we feel is appropriate for storefronts downtown, regardless of whether it's a realtor or a bookstore or a clothing store or a food store. We have to apply the same standard to everyone.
One of the tricky parts about the realtors, because obviously they're one of our main, is the difference between, say, the bookstore that can display books in there, because that's a display of goods, correct me if I'm wrong, but what, whereas this is all considered signage. So it gets a little, I think it's tricky to try and be fair. I also, if we change something in the sign ordinance, does everybody have to then comply with it, or do they get grandfathered in if their signs are already there? How does that work?
That's part of the benefit of having this not in the zoning code.
So in the city code, they would have to come into compliance?
What we could do though is we could specify a certain amount of time.
Okay,
We could say, here's the new regulations that the city has come up with regarding this topic. We're going to give everybody 18 months
Right.
to, make modifications as appropriate.
so if we did that, the realtors would have 18 months or whatever to clean their windows up, to be just.
And I think
But then watch.
Yeah, no, it's a problem for realtors. They're the ones that it's tricky.
Everybody. I think we're getting suspiciously close to the villages when we do stuff like.
Well, let me,
You can, you
let me,
can't, you should, you shouldn't, you may not.
well, a lot of this stems from the Supreme Court case Gilbert versus Reed. The Supreme Court says you cannot manage signs by content. It says that you can't have a certain regulation for realtors and a certain regulation for non-realtors. Everybody has to be treated equally. And you're basing your sign not on content, but on size and in other requirements. Now, in some communities, the realtors abide by the square footage requirement or the percentage requirement. And the way they do it is they just put up an electric screen that cycles their real estate up and on it. So they don't have all of the signs or all of their listings plastered all over the windows. So there is a way that they can still show their listings,
Yeah, but
but
it's not the same.
they just, I know, but they do it in a different way. But Supreme Court says we can't base signage on content.
Oh, I'm speaking for the whole downtown community, not just the realtors.
Correct.
I
And
mean,
we have to, a wall sign,
you're
you
gonna.
can't-
You're gonna
I
be
guess
down to
Bob, what I'm-
Culver's and tell him that he's got too much signage in his window, come on.
Well, but then that's where the display of goods and the signage comes in.
what,
Yeah, because, Barb, I understand your frustration with it. I think what we're
The more
trying,
rules you make, the more
Yep,
rules you
yep,
have to
yep.
enforce.
yep. I think one
Did
of
you hear
the,
the word money in there?
I think I do. I think one of the concerns is in the zoning code, we talk about transparency and wanting to be able to see through the windows, not have windows completely covered. Whether it's realtor sign or whatever it is. And since we can't differentiate between the businesses, it's a tough, I don't have a magic answer.
Everybody down there seems to be doing fine the way they are without us putting our thumb on them.
Well,
I don't see any storefronts downtown that are covered from side to side, top to bottom with advertising. Most vendors or merchants are savvy enough to understand they have to leave some space for people to look in and see what's going on.
Well, that's part of the
Without
discussion.
us telling them.
And if I can add, Bob, because we already have rules and regulation for signage. We have rules in place
Yes.
for how much signage can be in a window already. This is just a modification of how we would apply our signage regulations. So I don't think we're adding any new regulations. We're just changing how we're applying these. I would further add that all of the downtown realtors did not get signage applications to put those listing sheets in, and they have not always been doing this. This is only something that's cropped up in the last 5 years.
It is what it is.
And I would say that, why it also matters in the sense that if we have rules on the book that we should enforce them, that we have this 15% right now on the books, and we haven't been enforcing it. We haven't gone to realtors and saying, you have more than 50% coverage. So we're coming to planning commission, obviously. So do you want to change that? Because whatever we change it to, Jeff is gonna have to go out and enforce because to apply those standards equally. And right now, we don't enforce it. So I think if you're going to pick a number, that's the number that, whatever percentage is, that we should enforce. Otherwise, why do you have a rule on the book if you're not gonna enforce it?
Well, and we can reach out to the realtors, correct? I mean, I would
Yeah, that's
imagine we
definitely-
have and are going to say, how can we help? How can you guys help us solve this situation?
In fact, let's talk about next steps.
Yeah.
So the signage subcommittee has met one time and took a quick run through what we've got. And the consensus was that we really think we have pretty good sign ordinance. And so their initial thought is not to change it much at all, but to get input from the DDA. So our team is here and they're going to be talking to their members and that would include realtors and everybody to see if the some of our clients downtown have some suggestions
Yeah.
about the signage. So we don't have to decide anything tonight. It's more of a status report and we think there's actually a higher priority thing that we need to work on more quickly. And that short-term rentals, revisiting that.
Okay, well, before we leave, how slippery of a slope is it to look at real estate listings as goods?
Thank you.
We already have an attorney's opinion on that, because that was my initial thought, was
Yeah,
that
But can we work with the attorney to create our own definition of what these things are?
Well, because, you know, they're selling a service, right? So
They're selling a product too.
but they're not displaying that product. They're displaying a picture of that product, right? You know,
Well, and that's sort of my
Yeah.
point, is that so they are selling a product. There's a 3D physical thing that's too large to show in a window. So therefore, you know, they're showing a representation of that. Isn't there some way, I mean, I know they can also have monitors up there with rotating
Here's a
listings.
counter, here's a counter.
Yeah,
I own a men's clothing store downtown. So I take the cut sheets off of my clothes. And I say, these are goods and I'm gonna plaster them all on the window like the realtors do.
Pictures of all the clothes.
See what I mean? Because
Well,
I'm selling
true,
goods too.
but
So I'm gonna
thinking
put my goods on the window.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
Based on the Supreme Court ruling
Yeah.
of how we're gonna manage this. That's.
Right.
And
The question is, why would we
Understood.
care? If you
Well,
put pictures of clothes.
Actually, Bob, I didn't care, but the Supreme Court cared. So that's
Well,
what everybody's
but-
doing.
but as
It's
far
not
as
into
the
the pick and
definition,
choose, I just think the whole thing is
Yeah.
off the wall.
well, that's something that the planning commission could choose to do, is to say, we don't want any of this transparency, and you can put whatever you want up. I mean, that's why you're having the discussion.
I think there needs to be something set because it could be out of control and it could be neon signs and a lot of different signage that would cheapen kind of Harbor Springs, where I feel like there needs to be some kind of standard in place.
Yeah, but shouldn't that be left up to the individual merchant? If I have a men's clothing store and I cover the windows of my store with stuff and people can't look in and see the good suits I have on rack, that would be my problem. And I would pay for my own ignorance without having somebody come and say, you're making a mistake. I'm a grown man.
Yeah, but then you can start changing your sense of place, the quaintness of your downtown. So you want to make sure that you're keeping that integrity. You don't want everyone just plastering that stuff up. I mean, and just call them stupid.
I'm not seeing the difference between hanging 8 suits in the front window or 8 pictures of suits. I
At the
wouldn't
end
put
of
the
the
suits
day-
in the window because they'd fade, but I would put some pictures of suits in the window, and when they faded, I'd throw them away.
At the end of the day, you know, the rules that you come up with or the regulations that you come up with are regulations that we determine are what's best for the community and that are wanted by the community. So if we don't think that the community has a care of how much coverage windows have, you could say that coverage can be 100% if you feel that that's appropriate. And if the community says that they don't like that and they come back and they say, no, we want the windows to be completely open. You know, that's the thing, is you're helping to design the downtown so that it is the best experience for business owners, visitors, and everything in between. And you can help to shape that, hopefully based on what the community wants us to do. And if the community doesn't like some of the choices that we make, they'll certainly let us know and we can modify our decisions moving forward. Nothing that we do is set in stone forever. We can always adjust it as needed to fit the community. So, you know, whatever you'd like to come up with, can work. You know, whether it's 0%, 100%, or anywhere in between.
It just has to be consistent.
We just have to be consistent in our application.
All right, I'm gonna suggest we, oh, Tony has.
If I could just have 20 seconds.
Sure.
So I agree with a lot of the points. What I'm struggling with is coverage of glass as opposed to coverage of the front face of the building. You might have very small windows and you're only allowed to cover 15% of that, but the rest of it's a wall. Or you might have huge windows and you can cover 15% of it and it's going to be pretty big. So I don't know if maybe we need to think about percentage of the face of building I don't know, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, so we don't have to decide anything tonight. This is just a taste of the things that we're gonna be talking about. So why don't we get the input from the DDA and from our merchants and folks located in the downtown area, then we'll come back with some recommendations and we can kick it around. Sound good? And speaking of the public, does anyone have an initial comment on this or any thoughts?
Well, we have thoughts, but because we represent the downtown businesses, then I would rather not comment until the DDA gets together as a group and then we do canvass the community. But we need a good understanding of it too, you know, so that's why we're here.
Okay, Sue, did you have a comment?
I'm sort of with Bob, I mean, I
Can you
don't.
introduce yourself?
Sue Winter, State Street, 30-year resident. I don't think that, you know, people are gonna stop coming to our lovely town because Tom Graham has realty posters on his windows, and I see people standing there for long periods of time for entertainment. I mean, they love looking at those pictures. Okay, for what it's worth.
Okay, good. Yeah, come back
When
and
go downtown,
when we get down to it, yeah.
I'll check it out.
Any other comments from the,
Karen Outfield, 30-year resident. I've been to a lot of the meetings where this has been discussed, and Jeff said it's 3 feet back from the window pane. And so those pictures could be on a wall, a half wall, if you had to look in and see the professional office. So it could be 3 feet in, and a lot of the windows protrude, so that would work. I looked on the internet to see what you all were talking about covering windows. And for the most part, what I found were huge pieces of vinyl saying sale, discount, things, and they covered all the windows in urban towns, blighted areas. And I think that this possibly doesn't apply as much to us. But I recommend that you look on the internet to see what they mean by covering the windows. And I agree that pictures of suits, I mean, you wouldn't put your suit in the window. That's a good one. Thank you.
thank you. Any comments online, Victor?
One question for John. In your position, in your experience, is this something that's going on nationwide, or, I mean, and are all communities beginning to regulate their merchants?
Well, it's, since the Supreme Court ruling about 6 years ago, a lot of communities had to retool their zoning codes. Because they're not consistent with the Supreme Court ruling. So that's the impetus why a lot of communities are taking a look at their zoning. A hot topic always is the percentage of window covering in a commercial area. In every community, it's always a hot topic. Becky was the DDA, the Main Street director in Petoskey. She'll tell you that they've had the same conversations there as well. So signage is always a contentious issue with the business community because everybody has their own opinion on how signage should be regulated. So, but thankfully here, the sign ordinance is pretty good and has worked out really well. And there's just a little bit of tweaking that has to be done, but the real issue in the Supreme Court case is you can't regulate signs by content and by user.
Right.
So you can't give the realtors their own standard and then the non-realtor has to abide by a different, it's gotta be consistent. So I think the approach that the chairman mentioned was, let's get the feedback from the DDA and that'll help us then determine what that standard would be. It could be 15%, it could be 25, it could be 35, but like Jeff says, it's really a community. It's a community guideline more than it is anything that you're required to do. Community policy.
Yep, okay, well, you have one.
Am I allowed to?
Sure.
I'll just say for
Could you introduce
context.
yourself, please?
Oh, sure. My name is Anna McGlash and I'm gonna be talking later in my capacity for Tip of the Mint Watershed Council. I'm just talking now because I had a thought. So ignore the Watershed Council for this. One way that you could think about it is, I've lived in blighted neighborhoods before. And just like you were saying, there's an element of this which is a backstop, which is if there is an economic downturn and many of these businesses lost their ability to sell their product, there might be signage that would come up that might impact the sales of adjacent businesses due to the fact that that signage was changing. So that was a strong concern in one of the neighborhoods that I was in, is that it wasn't just that that specific business was struggling and had huge signs. It was that it then signaled that there were issues that made it more difficult for adjacent properties to do their business. And so I think that you're making an interesting and good point about regulating businesses in this positive direction around shaping the community moving forward. I just wanted to throw out there that a flip side of that is what if something bad did happen? And do you want any requirements in there for that unfortunate circumstance?
She makes a very good point.
All right, good, all right, I think we exhausted that one. Why don't we, because we're gonna have a whole lot more discussions about this one micro part of the whole bigger sign ordinance. So much more to come on that. Why don't we move on to short-term rentals? That sound good? All right, this is actually probably a more urgent one that we need to tackle. And Jeff, do you want to set this up for us?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that are important to note. We've had a short-term rental regulations in place for quite a while. One key feature of that was we had separated out and created a limitation on the number of short-term licenses available in single-family neighborhoods. The important feature to keep in mind here is single-family neighborhoods did not include our R2 zoning district. In our update of our zoning code, we have removed the R2 zoning district, and the R2 zoning district is now part of our entire single-family neighborhood. So we have a number of short-term rental properties that are in those R2 zoning districts that are kind of in limbo right now. The language that was part of ordinance 439, was it 439 that adopted the new zoning code, has language in it that essentially grandfathers in those existing license holders within the R2 district, but does not really set any language moving forward about how properties in the R2 district shall be treated. So as it stands right now, they're part of our single family neighborhood. We have 63 licenses available. We have the 63 licenses in the R1 neighborhoods, but now we have these additional number of licenses in R2 that are essentially now in addition to the 63. The language that Jim Raymer had in the ordinance is that as those licenses expire and those people choose to not include them, they go away. There would not be an inclusion for new licenses to be issued. So one of the questions that I think we need to address through our discussion of short-term rentals is how do we want to manage those R2 short-term rentals moving forward? Do we want to increase the overall number from 63 to a new number that would encompass these to make it easier for those properties to mesh and blend in with the existing short-term rental limitation that we have? Do we want to leave that number at 63 and through our attrition get down to that number? How do we want to look at that moving forward? So, in addition to, I think generally throughout the fall, we look at short-term rentals and re-envision, is what we have currently working, do we need to make any modifications or changes? So this is basically just kind of a start into that and kind of a timeline of how we want to do this over the coming year.
So again, this is one where we don't have to decide what the policy is tonight. In fact, we don't want to. And what I really need your concurrence on is a timeline and an approach for the rest of this year about how we are going to attack.
But they have their licenses until December 31st.
They have their licenses until December
And
30th.
again, I'm sorry, how many were there?
I was gonna ask you the number in R2.
I don't know the number in R2, but I will get that to you. Yes. We
Fair
need to know how
number.
many properties
There
this
were a fair
affects.
number.
Yeah. The former R2, yes.
And I don't have my maps with me today. Can you remind us what R2 district was?
Here. Front
Yep,
Street,
so
Main Street, or Main Street.
East Main Street on the south side.
Okay.
Right, that was an R2 district. The north side of Third Street, west of Judd. Those were R2 properties.
Okay.
The intersection of Main and Traverse Street, that corner there, which is now vacant, there was the cement block McGregor building that was there for anybody that remembers.
By Hillside.
Down by Hillside,
Yeah,
yes.
down
There were some properties there. Not many. So the number will not be a large
But
number.
there are a number of duplexes in those R2. There were a
Yeah.
number of duplexes.
So there will be some properties that are affected by this. We do have some short-term rentals. It's not a large number. But I will certainly get that information. I can maybe even do that tomorrow and email you what the total number is, but for future discussion, we will absolutely have that information available.
It might be good to see them on a map too, which.
Yeah.
Each parcel.
Yep.
Where they're at.
Yeah, we can do an updated map showing not just the R2 ones, but all of the short-term rental licenses that we have in the city.
So in the new zoning code, or in the ordinance for the short-term rentals, the ordinance that's in place now, it talks about the 63 in single-family residential or single, right? Is that,
Residential neighborhood.
or is it just not just, is it residential or is it?
Well, the new district that we created is RN.
I know, so I'm asking, the old ordinance specifically, I think,
It specified the zoning districts.
Yeah,
yeah.
they specified
It's been
R1A.
R1 and yeah, so those no longer.
Those no
exist.
longer exist.
So we need to redo that anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So we'll have public comment in a minute. I have a more fundamental question for planning commission. Do you feel we need to continue with some type of a approach to limit and regulate short-term rentals in 2025 and going forward?
Do we have a wait list for short-term rental license?
We do have a wait list. There's approximately 15 properties on,
So people are still looking, that's where I was going. They're still looking to do one.
and there are consistent requests for properties to know what district they are in and whether or not they would be put on the wait list or have a license available for them.
So there's still.
So there is still a large interest.
So when
in
someone's
short-term
looking to buy a home, they contact you and they want to know what the regs are.
So folks are still buying to short-term,
Yeah,
right?
that's what I would.
2 or 3 calls a week.
Oh, darn.
Yeah, that's what I would.
It does seem like when we went through all this before, we heard a lot of people talk about wishing to limit them. Strongly. I mean, that's what I took away from it. And unless that has changed, I feel I don't know how deep we have to go into it because we sort of came to our decision based on a lot of public information.
Oh, yeah.
And to revisit all that,
And even when we were going through the zoning process, the public meetings we were having a lot of people say, it's too busy. I don't know my neighbors. The quaintness is gone. And don't do anything to the zoning code that's gonna ruin that quaintness. So I think that that sentiment is still very much alive.
I think keeping a limit, yeah, just from the feedback from the public is, because we were even talking of reducing, so at least having some kind of limit.
or how to get back to the original 61 versus the 63. You
That was
know,
a comment recently.
yeah, I mean, I hear that
I
comment.
just didn't want to assume that planning commission wants to go forward with some type of limitations. We could spend a whole lot of time coming up with them and determine that it wasn't needed. Emily, do you have any thoughts?
No, I agree. I think like, we've had so much discussion and
Yeah.
if, we haven't heard the opposite, I'm all for keeping it, how it is and
Under some.
moving forward. Yeah.
Okay. Tony?
Yeah.
Larry? Okay, I think we've heard from Bob.
Yeah.
All right, so we are gonna go forward with some type of limitations and regulation. Then we just need to figure out what the right approach is.
Well, I'm almost out of the position. We've already done it, to be quite honest with you. And I like the number 63 and we've written in, well, they're going, the ones that aren't in the R2 people, that they zone out, they go away when they're not renewed and they're not transferable. Is that also correct?
Right.
Right.
But
So I'm just pretty happy with that.
do we want to
You're
single
totally-
out the R2 as opposed to just because we did away with you see what I'm saying?
Or you could sing, a way you could do is single out the first person who's like, I don't want to operate my short-term rental.
The RN zone actually is what we would be talking
Yeah,
about.
so it's all just the RN now.
I know, but so I don't want to refer to the getting rid of the
We
people that
don't
were. in
solve it
R2.
tonight. We don't want
Yeah.
to solve it tonight
Yeah.
because we're gonna
But I
want
see what
to
you're
have a
Yeah.
deliberate reconsideration, of everything, get some input, and likely have a public hearing, if you're in agreement on that. And it is summer, so there's two things related to summer. One, we do have more people in town to give input. Two, Jeff made a point that, we kind of recap at the end of each summer about how things went with short-term rentals and were there any issues, new issues, did policies work? So the proposed schedule that you have in your package would take us through probably 2 or 3 meetings of input and consideration, and then get our recap at the end of summer and make a decision. So what I'm asking for is your input or approval to consider this in July, possibly have a public hearing in August, and then make a decision in September and pass it on to city council and staff to implement.
I would say from my perspective, you should have a public hearing.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was, I think, something that Jim Raymer strongly recommended that we do is specifically have a public hearing.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, is everybody in agreement with
Is that in
that?
August?
Yeah, that would be August.
Is that our regular meeting?
Yeah, potentially, if that's what you want.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the schedule. Yeah, it's good.
Okay. All right, let's figure that's what we're gonna do.
One question or
We'll take it.
that I would ask is, unless we plan on having short-term rentals on the agenda for July, we could, if there's no thought that we need to discuss it further at that meeting, we could, because we would need a motion to hold the public hearing. If we want to just have that motion tonight to have a public hearing in August, unless you feel that you would like to bring up further discussion in July.
Well, I think personally that, Jeff, they asked to bring back a map of where everything's at, so I think in July, planning commission might want some more information.
Let's
Together, kind of
Yeah,
compile their
and maybe
thoughts.
present us some options that we could start
Yeah.
getting our teeth into.
It's a 15-day out. for
Yeah,
public
there'll be plenty of
hearing.
time.
Yep, we can do that.
In fact, does it make sense to schedule a public hearing tonight for August, or is that
Because there's no harm in it.
If
premature?
we know we want to do it, we could schedule it for the night of the regular planning commission in
In
August.
August.
It's August 15th.
Yeah.
So.
Let's do
I don't see a reason not to.
Okay, do we need a motion for that? Anyone like to make a motion to schedule a public hearing on short-term rentals for August 15th?
I move.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Need a roll call on that? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, public hearing, we have a approach and a schedule, all right. And then,
Is there a way to target people in this RN district to attend this meeting as far as marketing? For having this meeting, a special meeting?
I suppose,
The notice will go in the paper. It'll go on the
Yeah, we'll
website.
put a notice in the paper and realistically, we're gonna be discussing more than just the R2 district. I would say if we want to send notice to license holders, then I would recommend we send a notice to all license holders, not just R2.
Okay.
I think I'll step in there and say, you probably don't want to send specific notice to a specific category, because then you're gonna have probably a lopsided of just like.
We would be
people that are
waiting.
supposed to.
I was gonna say,
So I think we should just
yeah.
follow our standard course for what we do is
Okay.
post it on the website, post it on social media, post it in the newspaper. We can post it twice now that we have it, scheduled out this far ahead.
Because it's follow standard procedure.
Follow standard procedure, yeah, what we do with everything. I don't
Well,
know
we'll
that-
bring it up at each of the meetings, so that it'll be out there again.
You don't want, I don't think you want to unfairly target one group to kind of sway the public comment that you get. You want, to be equal. So if you just send it out to the license holders, you're gonna get.
okay, great. So we'll get some public comment in just a second, and then we have a special guest tonight who's gonna give us a new idea. And Karen Offfield had a new idea posted on We Love Harbor Springs site, which I thought was interesting, so I invited her to come and give us a quick overview of that particular idea, since we're gonna be looking at options at our next meeting. But let's go to regular public comment right now.
Hello, my name is Anna McGlashan, now speaking in my capacity as local policy manager for Tippecanoe Watershed Council. And I wanted to express that if you were going to be opening up the short-term rental ordinance, I was looking at your master plan, it looks like currently, according to the map in the master plan, it looks like approximately 80% of Harbor Springs is served by sewer, but the section that's between West Traverse near the Tunnel of Trees and Harbor Point is not. It would be our suggestion that properties that are served by an on-site private wastewater system are going to have that system inspected regularly as a condition of that licensing. And I'd be happy to come back and talk to you and present some specific language and some options. And I don't know if that's going to impact your timing at all, which I realize you just set up. So I wanted to provide that as an option that the Watershed Council be willing to discuss with you. And it is our recommendation to have short-term rentals have a septic system that is appropriately sized, because we know that those short-term rentals do frequently advertise for more than that house was designed to handle.
Can I just get a clarification of that point? Just not challenging your position at all, but are there properties in the city that are not serviced by city sewer?
Correct.
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, we'll take that under advisement, but we're gonna plow ahead on this schedule no matter what. So keep up with us and we can consider it. Great, all right, Karen.
No other questions?
I have a comment.
Oh,
for-
yes,
Is this the comment time for short
Yeah.
terms? Okay.
Yep.
I was listening to what Jeff said, and it was really great. He said that, of course, the signage relating to that, but the community, we listen to the community and we can change things that the community wants. And I'd like to find that short-term rentals. And I'm glad you're having a public hearing. I think that's really great, because things have changed a lot in the last, I think, 3 years. And I know they're doing a park survey right now, and it's going out in various ways. Why don't we do that? One of those are short-term rentals. I mean, parks, sure, they affect people a little bit, but short-term rentals in the neighborhoods affect people very directly. I really think there needs to be a lot more information. Like Jeff says, we need to know what the community wants. And so I would like the city to maybe think about doing something a little more drastic about that. Because I hear it all the time. I mean, I hear people saying, they don't like it, but it never seems to get to the right place. And I think the planning commission was great when they suggested 40. I think you guys were right on. You suggested 40 to go to the council. Council didn't like that. If they wanted 63 or 61 at the time. And if they had stuck with 40, the planning commission in the wisdom recommended, we would have 23 houses right now in town that could be long-term rentals. They could be doctors, they could be dentists, they could be bank workers. I mean, and sure, they could be seasonal people too, which are wonderful too, but they're tourists and they go back to their homes and they don't have problems like we do. You can't, you have to get on the waiting list to see a dentist. I mean, everybody's experiencing the problems we're having here with not having help. We see help wanted in every window. And I mean, in a way, the council gave away 23 homes that could be helping our community. So are we for the tourists or are we for the community? I think our city has to really take stock. It's cracking around the edges. And every day, I mean, you hear more problems that people are, I just went to the meat market class. Their hours are shorter now, they can't get help. And sure, that's the whole community or township wide. And tourists will always find a place to stay. There's always places for tourists to stay. The township is just popping up with new short-term rentals. We don't have to give up our community for people that have other places to stay. So I think the city's on the right track, bringing this up. Thank you very much for doing this, the Planning Commission, because things do change every year. And I know they just had a housing conference in Petoskey. It sounds really pretty dire. So let's relate that to what we're adding to it. We're adding to that, our city council by wanting so many. So thank you.
Thank you, Sue. All right, related to that, Karen, would you like to tell us about your idea? Again, we don't need to decide anything tonight. I just wanted to get this new idea out there for us to consider for options.
So jumping off what Sue talked about, it was Governor Gilchrist, which I don't remember, and he said his quote was, "Houses are for people who live and work in a place. We can always find ways to accommodate visitors." And so I guess the way that we can best talk about what we're doing in Harbor Springs is to know that the 63 houses could also be midterm and long-term rentals. So long-term rentals are sometimes involved with a lease. It can be for long-term employment. Midterm is a little bit different, 3 to 6 months, visiting doctors, visiting nurses, students, professionals, and they can also then rent one of these accommodations during the shoulder seasons. And so the expense for the owner of the property is reduced. Having a lot of experience, my background is in house management, and having a lot of experience with costs of the maid services, the snow removal, the grass cutting, and then the management fee itself, it all boils down to, does the homeowner want to do it? And we are now in about 5 to 7 years of this home short-term rental ownership. And it was about 7 years ago that it sort of came on the scene. And I would imagine that there are a lot of people that are exhausted. They are tired of being maids, they're tired of being repair people, and they're tired of looking after their homes. And they would love to be able to rent maybe a 3-month period of time to someone that came in. Now, when you have a midterm rental, you have maybe higher expenses. They need high-speed internet, maybe better lighting or something like that. So you may have some costs go up, but you're going to have some costs go down. But the homeowner can maybe then go on vacation and visit their children somewhere else. And so the idea of banking the licenses that you guys are talking about today and into the future might be something that you could consider talking about, because someone could have a short-term license, but then want to turn it into a midterm license or a long-term license for about a year and a half while they take, around the country thing to visit their grandchildren, or their parent is sick in another town and they have to go take care of them. And they can't be the maid, they can't be the management service anymore for their short-term rental. But they don't want to give up a license or a place because they just invested a bunch of money in the thing. So there might be a way to balance out employment housing and long-term housing with these short-term people, because I would bet that there are some people that are just tired. They're tired of running these operations. And so that's the idea of trying to morph maybe these 61, 63, and another 15, it's gonna be a big deal. And after your public hearing, you're gonna have a whole nother, organization of things that people bring to you. So it's gonna just go on and on and on. So anyway, that was my idea. Thank you, Bill, for the time to describe it. And I have the thing that he referred to right here, and I have some copies. So I'm gonna give them over here to Jeff, and you can pick one up on your way out. Thank you.
You have questions for Karen?
I got a question.
Yes.
So are you talking about creating a different licensing scheme or allowing short-term rentals to hold on to their license without having to pay a fee if there's a year that they don't want to?
Yeah, I think a new scheme that maybe there's some, there's some sort of a benefit. So it helps you, the city, and then it helps the homeowner. And maybe we can get back some of our missing homes.
So the city's action in this, if we decide it was a good idea, is to put in a process where somebody could declare that they're gonna be a long-term rental for the next 12 months or whatever. And if they were a current STR license holder, that license would be held, perhaps at no fee, perhaps a minimal fee. So, it's more administration.
Yeah, or a midterm, which is even different, and that can actually increase the thing, but you make, like, when you like you could say, okay, it comes up in the end of March, and you would come to you guys and you'd say from March until June, I want to rent the place to an employee. And so maybe it would be something that I'm not trying to insinuate that you guys become a rental business for Harbor Springs, but maybe in a way, you have the list of possible tenancies that are available for people for that shoulder season. And then it's money in the person's pocket, but then it's an employee for the restaurant during the shoulder season.
We already permit by right rental of long-term rental of property, which we have determined to be anything that's longer than 30 days. So anybody that's tired of doing short-term rental has that as a by right ability to rent for any period of time longer than a month.
We do have people who pull out short-term rental licenses who really don't use it, but they just want to hold it as a placeholder. And they'll rent out long-term, or they might only rent out their short-term rental once or twice. But in effect, I guess what we're hearing is, what I think is what I'm hearing is that someone can rent out can pull out short-term license 1 year and then not do it the next year, but still reserve their place as a short-term rental license holder without having to pay that fee.
Putting in an escrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, put it in escrow or.
And that's, I guess, more a philosophical thing, because one of the things we talked about was you don't use it, you lose it. It goes to the next person.
Yeah.
And so that's.
And this midterm rental, the legislation hasn't, it's sort of a new thing, and so that it hasn't really caught up with it yet. So it might be something that is an educational opportunity. But I'm talking about employee housing,
My only concern is if we're maintaining that person's spot with a short-term rental license, that means we're still spending administrative time on that. And that's what that administrative fee is supposed to cover. And we already have some property owners that don't short-term rent their property, but they keep a short-term rental license because they may choose to do so in the future. And the fee for a short-term rental license is only $400 or $450 per year. So we kind of already have that of some property owners doing that where they're just holding it as a placeholder. And I don't think that the fee is too tremendously high to prevent somebody from taking that attitude to do so right now.
So we can consider that.
Certainly talk about it.
Why is there a fee?
Because of the amount of time that short-term rentals take. During the summertime, when we have a high number of complaints and a high number of enforcement action taken, in my 75-hour, 2-week time period, there was one month where during that 75-hour, 2 weeks, 40 of my hours were spent regulating short-term rentals.
It's also for the processing of the applications, we have multiple, and it's also the enforcement company that we have contracted with to monitor short-term rentals in the city via the different.
Did you say enforcement company?
Yeah, there's a company that we've had, for.
The tracks.
They track, they don't do the enforcement, but they track, where short-term rentals are, and if there's not one on the, if they spot one on Airbnb that we don't have license, they'll notify us that, hey, there's a short-term rental operating without a license, and so then Jeff, so that costs money, so that's where the fee goes to, the fee, we've heard from previous that we should raise the fee higher, and I always tell people, we only set a fee to cover our costs, and that's the only reason you can charge a fee, so that $400 does cover our costs.
Okay, so thank you for bringing us
thank
that
you.
idea. Appreciate it. All right, it's one of the many things we can consider over the next few months. All right, any final comments on STRs? We're moving to our final. Okay, next thing on the agenda is the coastal resiliency briefing.
Yeah.
And John's gonna take us
You're
through.
gonna handle
He's got
the really.
point on here. We also just have a PDF right in the.
PowerPoint's got a video
Ooh.
embedded.
You'll have to. I believe in your videos. Like it.
It's under Emmett County. Which one is? It'll be the Harbor Springs.
Share that.
Yeah.
You can share the screen.
Yeah, he's working on that right now.
All right.
Yeah, what's the goal of tonight's?
Well, what the presentation is, I thought would be interesting is that back in March and April of 2024, a couple months ago, the Emmett County had received a grant from the Coastal Zone Management Program to do an educational series on shoreline resiliency. And what they did is they emailed all the property owners along Lake Michigan from the straits all the way down to the county line at Charlevoix County. And they had 5 workshops scattered throughout the county to basically explain what's going on with shoreline resiliency, just to make people aware of, I think the idea is that 4 or 5 years ago, we had high water and people have already forgotten that currently. And when we had high water, a lot of communities were impacted, a lot of property was impacted. So they put this, we consulted with the county and we worked with the Coastal Zone Management Program on putting this slide deck together as part of an information. I thought it would be appropriate. They haven't done it at the municipal level. They just did it for property owners. But I think it's very important for planning commissions to have an understanding of coastal resiliency based on the what's going on because of the impacts it can have in the community. And because Harbor Springs is a coastal community, I thought it would be appropriate to have to do the educational piece. You want me to run the slide deck?
I can do it.
You do it? Go ahead. As I had mentioned, this was funded by Eagle in the NOAA, and it was administered through the Coastal Zone Program. Go ahead. Two of the people in the state of Michigan that are primarily, I would say, the cutting edge experts that have been working on coastal resiliency for the last probably 10 years is Guy Meadows, who's recently retired as a professor from Michigan Tech. And he was the dean of the coastal engineering program. And then Dick Norton, who's a PhD and a JD that teaches that out of the University of Michigan. Guy Meadows tackled the coastal engineering aspects of resiliency. And then Dr. Norton tackled the land use and zoning implications of resiliency. So the two of them have had a pretty significant impact on how the state's policy's been shaping up. And they've worked with the state and with the Michigan Association of Planning and other agencies on the coastal resiliency issue. One of the things that I think people are starting to becoming aware, there's been a lot of kind of like avoidance of the discussion, but I think just this week with the heat dome that's over the eastern part of the United States, people are starting to recognize that we are in a period of climate change or global warming. This slide is pretty impactful, I think. If we lower our emissions, even lowering our emissions, Michigan's climate in 2050, so around another 30 years from now or less, our climate is going to be very similar to what we're experiencing in Kentucky today. And by 2090, our climate's going to be very similar to Arkansas. Now, with high emissions, if we don't curtail our emissions, carbon, they're estimating that Michigan's climate is going to be very much like Missouri and northern Texas. That's going to have a profound impact on the Great Lakes relative to that level of warming, because one of the components of Michigan's weather, and we haven't seen it in a few years, is ice cover. There hasn't been really any ice cover on the Great Lakes. Ice cover is extremely important, especially in the winter, because that's when we have the greatest percentage of evaporation. So the ice actually limits the amount of water that we lose to the atmosphere. So without ice cover, the Great Lakes are going to see lower levels. We're going to see greater snow events inland. And actually during the spring, probably higher rain events as well. So there is an issue, there's a correlation between what's going on with the climate and what's happening with coastal resiliency and coastal issues. This is a map that I apologize for the lack of clarity, but I found this recently in a magazine. These icons were for 2023. These icons all represent $1 billion storm events in terms of damage. And you can see where they're clustered primarily in the central part of the country, from Texas up to Illinois and Wisconsin. Michigan so far has been looked at as a climate refuge state. We haven't had many significant storms in that type of category, and people are starting to notice that. I can tell you that we're just wrapping up the master plan in Marquette. And one of the things that came out during the sessions there were the city has noticed that people have moved into the community that are primarily from the south and the west. And when they've talked to them, the reason why they're moving into the Great Lakes is to get away from the floods, the fires, and all of the other hurricanes and all the other severe weather that's being experienced in other states. This is a graph of the water levels in Lake Michigan since 1920. That's been recorded by the Corps of Engineers. And you can see the dashed red line is the Lake Michigan elevation, which is 580.5. So you can see where water levels have been low and where they've been extremely high. And towards the right-hand side of the chart in 2020, 2019, and 2020, you can see where they were the highest that we've experienced. This is a shot of the Petoskey Marina in March. Next slide. This is the same marina in 2019 and 20. So the water levels over the last 5 years have fluctuated almost 5 feet in that period of time, which is rather significant in terms of the degree of fluctuation of the time period. This is just a comparison shot of the same marina, so you can see that back in 2019 and 2020, you couldn't even, people had to walk through the water to get to their docks. Part of the impact of high water back in that period of time, 2019 to 2020, was its impact on infrastructure. This is part of the Little Traverse Wheelway that was completely eroded through high water damage. Next slide. This is the Petoskey waterfront. Their armoring didn't help. It washed out a fairly sizable part of the waterfront bank through erosion. One of the reasons why this was very impactful was that that right where the edge of the shore is now, where the bluff is, the black or the dirt area, right along that was the sanitary sewer line that connects to Bayview, and that was exposed. I didn't have a slide, but I know that was in the Petoskey paper. And before the city was able to muster the funds and the crews to get down there and fix it, the pipe was actually exposed where it had further eroded. And you had about 8 feet of sanitary pipe that was just hanging out in the middle of nowhere. And that provided all the sanitary collection, Bayview and that part of Bear Creek Township. And you can see part of the pipe in the slide. And by the time they got there, that entire pipe was exposed. So a couple of definitions that we tried to educate owners on was the definition of accretion, which is the natural process when you have normal wave action. The waves will basically pull the sand away from the coast. And then during another climate event, it'll reposition or redeposit the sand, which is a natural process. Go ahead. And the other part is the littoral zone, which is the area between the shore and the water. And this is a very dynamic area that has impacts relative to armoring and natural environment. So as this area is disrupted over a period of time, it can have an impact on adjacent properties. And I'll show you some slides of armoring and the impact it has on properties. And we do have some properties here in the city, and we have quite a few in the township that are already armored, unfortunately. In the Michigan Supreme Court case, determined that anything that was below the high water mark was part of, it's accessible as part of the public trust. People were always kind of weird about people walking on their beach. The Supreme Court, Michigan Supreme Court, said that shoreline of the Great Lakes below the high water mark is part of the public trust and people can access that. It gets a little bit complicated when people do armoring and seawalls because they basically change the natural course of the lake and they prevent people from having access to the water. Next slide. So one of the things that I wanted to point out, and I think we've incorporated this data into the zoning code, is that Eagle, under state statute, has identified Lake Michigan and Lake Huron elevation as 580.5. All right, and that's in the code here. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, on the other hand, they specify their elevation at 581.5. So there's a foot discrepancy between the state and the Corps of Engineers. This was very interesting to some of the property owners that are in the process of trying to get permits from both Eagle and Corps because they go for a joint permit. And unfortunately, the agencies have a different elevation. So you have to be very careful as a riparian owner along the lake in terms of what your elevation is going to be and where you want to build or not build.
And that dictates how far back
Back
you
you
have
go.
to be.
Yes, that dictates how far back you gotta go.
But why the difference?
You know, the feds came up with their own data and Eagle, and actually, DEQ, this was formalized by state statute probably 20 years ago.
This is before Eagle.
Yeah, this is before Eagle. There's a state statute that actually has all of these numbers in it, what the state recognizes as the elevation. So we just tried to make people aware, depending on what permit they're going through, there's gonna be a different elevation. And if, when you think of a foot, depending on if you have a piece of property that has very gradual grade,
That's huge.
that's huge. So people are going, wow, we didn't know that. Well, you know, it was part of the education process. One of the things that you're gonna see in a series of maps, which we can factor in, you know, in terms of master planning and zoning, is this scenario, storm event scenario planning that Guy Meadows and Dick Norton came up with relative to how to evaluate storm water levels based on storm event. So you're gonna see storm scenario planning that's based on 3 outcomes. They have one is called the Lucky scenario, which is normal water levels with a storm event of less than 100 years. A lot of stormwater ordinances are based on a 25-year storm. 100-year storm is supposedly, you're gonna get that storm once in every 100 years, but typically that's not happening now. We've actually seen 500-year storms already. The expected scenario is that the water level is gonna be close to the high level, and you're gonna have a 100-year storm. And the perfect storm scenario is we're gonna have high water levels like we did in 2019 and 20, and we're gonna get hit with a storm that's greater than a 100-year storm event. Which means is you're gonna have high water compounded by a more severe storm, which is gonna push more water inland and have a greater impact on property.
So it's almost like a surge.
It's like a surge. And here's an example, a graph that shows lucky versus expected versus perfect, based on, again, water levels and based on storm event. Go ahead. So is there an icon there you can click? No, not on yours, not on this one. Okay, well, let's just go ahead and cycle through the next slide. So one of the things that we showed property owners, and this is kind of a valuable tool for municipalities, is that there is a coastal resiliency atlas that's done for all of Northwest Lower Michigan. And I'm just going to show you really quick the panels for the townships and the villages and the cities here in Emmett County, so we can go through them. These are based on GIS information using the data that was constructed by the 3 different storm scenario events. So these are like a traffic signal. Green is the lucky, the expected is in the yellow, and the perfect storm is in red. And you can take a look at these maps and really figure out how far inland water surges could occur in the future based on the various events and water levels. This is the panel for the village of Mackinac City. And you can see that a lot of the properties along the lake are definitely going to be impacted. In fact, in some areas, they go about the equivalent of a city block in. And they're in the process of updating their master plan, and they're taking a look at this information relative to zoning and setbacks in the future. This is Bliss Township, but this specifically is Wilderness State Park, which has the peninsula or the finger that goes out into the lake. Yeah, and you can see the impacts there. Even a little bit more significantly, go ahead to the next slide. Want to show you, this is the lake level viewer. This is current water level. This is a water level of 579, which is very close to the normal elevation of 580. And you can see, you know, areas that are covered in water and areas that are in land. If you go to the next slide, this is 582, so the water level is up 3 feet, and you can see where quite a bit of the peninsula is actually inundated and underwater. So these are photographs that were taken over a 5-year period. So you can see the impact that these water levels and storm events have on property. Go ahead. And then this is part of the Wilderness State Park panel. You can see how far inland Perfect Storm goes, primarily because they have a lot of wetland along the lake there, which is very shallow and it doesn't have a lot of topography in the water, and the waves can come in for a significant distance. The one benefit here is that there's no built out environment. So this is all natural area and most of it can absorb the impact, but there's no buildings or structures here. Go ahead. As we move down, this is Cross Village Township. You've got areas up against some of the bluffs and coastal areas that are going to be impacted. You can scroll again. And this was an interesting photo when some of the property owners in the meeting saw on the left side, they saw the scenario, and then on the right-hand side, they saw their lots. So many of them could see that a lot of their lots and a lot of their cottages or seasonal homes could be significantly impacted by a perfect storm. So, go ahead. And then there's Redmond Township, which because of their topography doesn't have as much of an impact. And then there's Friendship Township. I want to point this out. In Redmond, when they did their community master plan, the scenario lines using GIS were actually overlaid on aerial photography. And doing so, they were able to pinpoint houses along the coastline that would be impacted by the expected and the strong storms. And they're in the process, as part of their master plan action plan, was to take a look at zoning provisions with Emmett County to start shifting those setbacks back from the coastal area because of these potential impacts. Go ahead. Friendship doesn't really have a lot. Then you go down to West Traverse, and now we start getting into West Traverse, and we start getting into the city of Harbor Springs. Here's Harbor Springs. So you do have areas within the city that have are susceptible to impact. This is a more detailed aerial shot using ortho digital photography. You can see that a lot of the Harbor Point is going to be impacted on both sides. And then you have some areas just south of the downtown in the city that are in the perfect storm area. And then areas on the north side of the city over by Glen Drive. And then what we did is, take the next slide. We actually used the GIS information, applied it to the city's map to show in more detail where these high risk areas are. And if you take the next slide, we blew up a lot of the areas that are just on the end of the south end of Glen Drive. A lot of those houses are all within the impacted area based on perfect storm, which is high water in a storm over 100-year event, which is not, like I said, uncommon. Go ahead. Little Traverse Township, some of the resort communities like Weequahic and some of the other ones down there have impacts. Bill Dome from the supervisor from West Traverse or Little Traverse has already requested all of the panels, and their planning commission is starting to take a look at these as part of their zoning as well. And then we have Bear Creek, which is cannery condos, and the city of Petoskey, which doesn't have a lot of impact. And then you go out to Resort Township, and in Resort, the area that's pretty much impacted is the interior harbor of the Bay Harbor development is within the critical area. So the interesting part, when they did this overall analysis in 2019, they were able to actually estimate the amount of SEV that would be impacted. And by a perfect storm that hit Emmett County, they estimated in 2019 assessment dollars about $500 million in damage, or about 13% of the tax base would be somewhat impacted by the perfect storm. So it's kind of a significant number. $500 million in SCV, you're talking in the billions of dollars storm event that could happen here, like in other parts of the country, depending on if all of the factors are correct. Go ahead. So a lot of communities now are starting to apply this information relative to local setbacks, planning, education of property owners. Couple of property owners that were at the meeting after they saw this were thinking they better talk to their insurance companies about if they have flood damage insurance as part of their riders. So people are looking at this and saying, I could see this happening because a lot of people that attended the sessions were here during the high water event when they had high water in their backyards, or they couldn't use their docks because they were underwater. So, it starts to make sense for some of the folks. One of the things that is having an impact on the development along the coastline is what they call hard armoring. We saw a lot of this during high water. DEQ, or Eagle at the time, was handing out permits like you couldn't believe. Anybody that wanted to do hard armoring, they were granting a permit. Go ahead. The problem with hard armoring is that it may protect your property, but then it increases the erosion of property on both sides of the hard armor because it deflects the wave action around it. So, in fact, we had a couple of residents from a Little Traverse that were just outside of the city where their adjacent property owner had done hard armoring, and they've already seen where their property is being eroded. So the question they asked, which we couldn't answer, is, has there been a lawsuit yet filed against a property owner that's used hard armoring because it's actually eroding their property and they're losing their value?
But this got permitted.
Yes. So what came out of this was we had a couple of people from DEQ or Eagle at the meeting. We had their permitting person there, and then we had their coastal zone management person. And both divisions have different policies relative to how you treat the coastline. So the permitting people will take a look at this and they may permit it, whereas the coastal energy or the coastal zone management people are saying you don't want to do it because you see what the impact is. So the state doesn't have a consistent policy yet. I think they're driving towards it, but it's a proven fact that hard armoring is not the way to go. Go ahead. And seawalls is part of the hard armoring. You can see where it really prevents people from using the beach that they should have access to. Next slide.
So is there a difference between a resident hard armoring and, let's just say, a community wanting to get a permit to hard armor? All I know is I can't get hard armoring to save my soul. They'll say, the turtles can't get up it. I mean, I can't get it.
Well,
Why are these people getting it?
I have no idea, but I can tell you that in the video I wanted to show you, some of the communities like Grand Haven, down in like Grand Haven, Douglas, Saugatuck down there, St. Joe's, for example, they have ordinances that will not allow hard armoring. They've already come to the conclusion it's too destructive. So as a local unit of government, they won't allow it. So.
Yeah, but this was even at like a state level. So
Yeah.
the city of Zilwaukee, they're losing their fishing pier. So we're trying to get the fishing pier fixed. They're like, no, it's gone, it's gone, it's gone. We're not gonna allow it. It's bad for the wildlife. It's bad for the shore. It's bad. And then I see this. I mean, well, some people are getting it.
And the other issue, we haven't seen it, well, we did. I was involved in 2 site reviews for the county during high water. Couple of properties over in Friendship Township were in the process of their houses were starting to collapse, where the rear of the house was, because of the erosion, was starting to have structural cracks. So they were looking at strategies of moving the house. The property owners had multi-million-dollar homes and they were frantic because what was happening with the bluff erosion because of the high water. And you saw the impact here with the Little Traverse Wheelway, where that portion's collapsed into the lake as well. So hard armoring is not a cool thing, and there's a lot of consequences to it. One of them is the loss of shore and beach. The other one is that it has impacts on the adjacent properties. Go ahead. So there's alternatives that are being advanced now. One is beach restoration, which can be expensive, but people are starting to use it. Property owners are. Go ahead, another one. The other big one, I think it's a way better solution. Seeing it here in Michigan now, a tactic that's been used in North and South Carolina for years because of the damage to hurricanes is basically coastal restoration, where they're restoring the coastal areas with native materials, basically to serve as a buffer for high water events, which it's a great strategy and it works. Again, it's a little costly, but in those communities, the state, South Carolina, North Carolina are picking up the cost to doing the coastal vegetation. Go ahead. And the other, what we've seen here in Michigan is people are actually picking up their house and moving it away from the coastline. Harbor doesn't have a lot of bluffs. We have the inland bluff, but some of the down coast communities like in, Grand Haven down there in Berry and Ottawa County, that's where some of these slides have been taken, where they've literally picked the house up and they've moved it 200 feet inland to get it away from the coastline. Go ahead. So, one of the things that we're recommending to communities when they update their master plan is to include chapters on coastal resiliency. Next slide. And here's some examples. In St. Joe's, they have an overlay district, which requires the houses to be built way back from the coastline. They've done engineering to determine what that line is. And they are not allowing any variances in any of those overlay districts. So variances are off the table. You have to follow the overlay. In Grand Haven, they've actually identified by doing detailed surveys exactly where these lines are at and where people have to build. They call it the no build line. So you cannot build up to the line, you have to build behind it. And they actually have it surveyed. So there's no question, there's no subjectivity to it. It's there. They know where the lines are at. And here's just a synopsis of what's going on here in Emmett County. The county, which represents Bear Creek, Bliss, Cross, Friendship, Redmond, and Wawatam, they have a 60-foot setback. West Traverse has 60 feet. Harbor Springs had 25, and now we went to 35. Little Traverse, Petoskey have 0, and Resort has 40. So there's not even a consistent setback throughout the county in terms of where buildings should be built and from a distance from the shoreline. So one of the things that has been used here in Emmett County is what they call geotubes. This is a shot. Basically, they're very large canvas tubing, which are filled with sand, and they're used in place of armoring. The thing about these is over a period of time, they degrade and the canvas deteriorates, and then the sand just automatically replenishes the beach. So these are a strategy that's being used. Go ahead. And then these are some other strategies. One of the things that we talk to clients about is that everybody thinks damage from the water comes from the lake. Damage also comes from the land. You can have erosion on the lake side that's caused by poor stormwater strategies that are being used. So this is a matrix that talks about things like green roofs, having more vegetation, rain gardens, living shoreline, which, like, for example, in Petoskey, they're going to convert part of the Petoskey waterfront into a living shoreline and get rid of the armoring, slope it back, and then replant it. So different strategies are being used. The one thing that I just want to make sure that we're all aware of is that Emmett County is updating its 2016 hazard mitigation plan. And in the 2016 mitigation plan, they did not really have anything in it that dealt with coastal resiliency. They talked about, tornadoes and thunderstorms and ice events and snow, but there was nothing in there about high water. So they're in the process of updating it. They're indicating that they're going to have a chapter in it. We're just telling everybody, make sure that when it does come out and it's out for draft form, communities need to review it relative to what their proposed strategies are for their respective communities and properties.
Because they're saying high water is gonna be in this one.
Yes, that's what they're saying. And these are just some other strategies, but these deal with things like, again, restoring sand renourishment, things that are strategies that do not involve hard armoring. Go ahead. And if you want any additional information, there is a project website called emmettcountyczm.org, which has a lot of videos. The one thing I was going to share with you, we just couldn't get it to work. I think you must have an older version of PowerPoint. Is that I had an embedded video. The state produced 6 8-minute videos that go through the very beginning of what the coastal program is, all the way to different strategies. They're professionally produced. They're very well done. And like I said, each one takes about 8 minutes, and you can access them by going to the project website and clicking on the video. And like I said, they're very well done. This was number 6 out of 6. This one dealt with resiliency planning. Some of the other ones deal with some of the basics of coastal zone engineering, which kind of set the platform for this. So that's kind of it. I wanted to give you, unfortunately, they didn't go to the communities and present this. It was all for property owners. But I felt, and I talked to Tammy about it, we've got to get this out to the planning commissions, because they're the ones that have to really start doing the advanced thinking on this. So that was the educational session today.
Okay, so the question is, what do you think we need to do going forward as a planning commission? Do we need to make any changes to our ordinance? Or do we have?
I think, we did map it, and I can bring a copy of the map to take a look at. I think one of the things that the CZM recognized was they've got to get the word out to the property owners to make them aware of areas that they're within a high risk area, just to make them aware. Now, right now, with the water levels at normal level, not a big deal. They get back up to where they were 4 or 5 years ago, people are going to start, it's going to be an issue with them. So I think one of the things that a planning commission or a municipality could do is at least advance the information to property owners that are within the risk areas to say, hey, you really need to know that based on what's going on with high water and storm event, your property could be impacted to some degree. But, the area that I saw here in Harbor when we mapped it with the GIS information from the state was like the areas over by Harbor Point and Glen Drive. I mean, a lot of those are in the red zone. So and that's where some of your valuable properties are located. So I think, people need to be aware. It's kind of like when you buy a piece of property, you want to know if you're in a floodplain or not. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the next generation of floodplain planning, is kind of getting an understanding of what your risk areas are.
Well, it's interesting because what this really brings home is that there is no going back to the old normal.
No.
That no matter how much you recycle or how much you do this or that or the other, we're not gonna see going back to where we were. This is something that's here to stay and going to continue. It's just, this is a perfect example of it, but just looking at the first diagrams where you had what our actual climate was going to be like, in these very short periods away from us. I mean.
Yeah, best case
And,
scenario.
and,
Kentucky.
yeah, and as far as looking at planning, this is where it really comes home, is how we have to think really quite differently than where we've been for forever, because the entire context has changed.
And this is
So-
very, very minor, but
Yeah.
this is, I would say, something we noticed at the city back in 2019, 2020 was we were getting calls probably once a week when the water was that high about people saying, oh, your water pipes must have broken, our basement or our area, our floors are flooded. So Lucas was going out regularly to people on the waterfront to basically say, hey, no, this is high water. But it was just interesting an observation that, people didn't recognize that how the high water was really impacting their property. They thought it must have been, because a lot of them were gone and they come back in the summer and then, they find this flood in their house. So we received many calls about that.
Even homes as far inland as 3rd and 4th Street.
Yeah,
So, and also think about, you showed the example of people moving houses. Now, being on the county ZBA and being on the planning commission here, are these events considered a hardship? So that somebody comes here, their house is on the water, And they have to move it because the level's coming up, so they want to move it back. Now they have to move it back into the rear or front yard setback, depending where you are. Is this considered a hardship? So they have a basis for,
Yeah, my opinion, Mark, would be that it's just like a property that somebody buys a piece of property and 60% of it has a significant slope on it. And because of that, they're gonna have a hard time positioning the property. So to me, that's a physical hardship. They didn't create it, it was there. It's the same thing. The hardship is being created by coastal and climate conditions that are affecting the property. So yeah, I would say that there is a hardship that they should get relief where they can move it to where it's not gonna be impacted.
We have a very applicable example, I think, that we can use. It's not exactly the same scenario, but very similar, is we have a restricted bluff zone. We've established that the slope of the bluff needs to be protected for the safety of the community. So we have areas of the property that we say that they can't build. And then we have a small area within proximity of it that we say that they can build, but they need planning commission approval. And the backside or the north side of Third Street near Judd is a great example. The bluff is very in close proximity in creating a narrow buildable envelope for properties. And so they come to us for variances to be able to build closer to the street because the issues that the bluff presents to the back of the property.
Down at the boatyard, under normal conditions, we see the water, depending on the time of the month and the wind direction. This bay changes elevation as much as 14 inches in 12 hours. Under normal conditions. The other day, and what we get to see, and it's a very unusual thing. We see the water leaving. And around our pilings, you see the current. As this bay drains out or comes in.
Was it the wind?
And depending on the time of the month and the position of the moon.
Okay.
Well, we had that
Under
safe,
ideal conditions.
we had that
Suddenly you
safe,
wake
Bob,
up and-
remember that? Bob, remember that safe that picked up a bunch of the docks a couple years ago?
Yeah,
And it was like a couple feet.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, this graphic puts Main Street underwater.
Yeah, it's part of the downtown and then the Glen Drive and the point. Harbor Point, it gets it from both ends.
So would there be a benefit, the city having an information session for property owners?
I think at some point in time you may want to do, I mean, here's the map based on their analysis. You can see that parts of the city, depending on where you are are impacted by the perfect storm.
Yeah.
Back in the early 70s, water was so high here that you couldn't drive down Beechwood Park. Water was up over the road.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's when some of the stone walls were built. And that was closed for a long time.
That's my question back to John was, I think public education is important, but I guess my question more was, is there anything the planning commission can do, the city council can do as far as ordinance, or should they do something with an ordinance that, there was a lot of recommendations there. And
Yeah,
When do we start addressing?
yeah,
that?
that's really, that's what I get at.
Yeah, you have to get into a little bit more deeper dive on the data in terms of the mapping to figure out exactly what properties are impacted, but then, well, like they did in Grand Haven, and they did down in Holland and those areas, some of the houses, it's kind of like they're gonna be non-conforming, but they tried to establish the limits for like new construction, like, anything that comes after we do this, it's gotta be within an area. They weren't encouraging people to build closer. They were trying to use regulations to get them to move back a little bit. But Harbor's pretty built out. So some of this is gonna be education and preparation. I think the other part of it is from a municipal point of view, is the municipal infrastructure at a point where it could withstand like a perfect storm. you know, in terms of stormwater, water.
No, but nobody is. I'm sure we're not because nobody is.
Yeah, but this is part of the planning process, you know.
And I would think too, when you're talking about the armory part, the hard armory is, that has me concerned because we do, in 2020, we had a lot of property owners abutting public property and but other private property, putting all this in there. And, you know, I haven't gone out and studied, you know, we haven't done what the effects are on our property, but it seems like it could have a significant impact on our shoreline. And I think it's more of a, you know, you're doing something to your property that harms your neighbor's property, which is something that.
Do people need to get approval to do hard armoring?
Yes.
They go, yeah.
And is that approval still being given or?
But it's not from the city, it's from the.
You know, I think Vanessa's kind of had an experience. They're starting to kind of slow it down because now they're starting to see what the associated impacts have been.
But in 2020, we were having many people coming to us and trying to advocate on their behalf from the state when they were looking for permits. So it was a very interesting period.
And I get that we're built out, but don't we need to put something in place for when these homes are washed away? That they can't go back to where they were at?
Great question.
Yeah.
Because enough time goes by, people forget and they start building again.
Or
So-
if you implement something for redevelopment,
Right.
somebody just decides to knock down and rebuild, now you need to be back.
Right, I mean, I think we need to address this.
Or do
It was
we add
100 years
regulation
strong,
regarding
Vanessa.
that?
We can have another one for 100 years.
Okay.
Hey, should we go to the Watershed Council, see what they would recommend for us?
So my name's Jennifer McKay and I'm the Chief Policy and Government Affairs Director. And I've been working on this exact effort. And so thank you for bringing it up. I work with Dick Norton and Guy Meadows. I've been working with them for years on this issue. And working on this in Boyne City right now. And we're working on developing regulations, especially for particularly the shoreline protection and resiliency measures. So increasing the setbacks, prohibiting the actual hard seawalls, and then putting in measures that would provide, you have to provide proof for what type of armoring you put in. So, or I should say shoreline stabilization. So, and it goes everywhere from rocks and revetment down to what was called living shorelines, which we call bioengineering, which is putting in some of the living material with some of those rocks, but to anchor in that shoreline with that vegetation or what we call foyer logs. So we're working on a whole host of different things with them, and we'd be glad to come in and assist you. But it's the same thing. It's for redevelopment because Boyne City is completely built out and their shoreline is already set with how it's developed, how it's armored. And so it's really looking at for those properties that are either redeveloped or, you know, they don't have any parcels that can be purchased new. And also looking at the public, community properties that are generally right along the shoreline as well. And something of note, you have a couple years, but that International Great Lakes Datum that is mentioned, that is actually in your regulations, based upon 1985, it's being updated to what's called 2020 International Great Lakes Datum, and it's going to be released in 2027.
So watch for that.
Watch for that because it will impact how all the regulations, how everything is based upon the ordinary high water mark. It'll all change.
So Watershed Council would be available to advise us about future steps if we decide.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're working, like I said, we're working directly with Boyne City on development of language and because they had frustrations that they were a city and a lot of our recommendations were meant for in, you know, more of the rural area. So they asked us to come in for the cities.
Yes, Karen.
So do you think that the high water there, in red, is that coming in through the wetlands?
To some degree, yeah.
Yeah, so, Little Traverse Conservancy handles that whole area there. Have you spoken with them, John?
No, not yet, no.
Yeah, that's unbelievable, huh?
Yeah.
It certainly looks like it's going much further than the wetlands.
Yeah.
You know, the previous picture there even shows some buildings.
Mhm.
And that red area coming in past the conservancy looks like it encompasses almost all of the Southern Crandall's addition downtown, which would be Second, Third, and Fourth Street.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
That's-
it's
why
it's
I think-
substantial.
Yeah.
So Karen, your point is, water doesn't necessarily come from the lake, it can come from rainfall and build up in the
Well,
lowland.
it's low areas, so
Low
it's
areas,
collecting.
pushed in.
Yeah. It's Second and Third Street, you can't even do a basement there very easily because of the high water underground.
Yeah, it's true, mains.
Wow.
When we see the water levels rise from the Great Lakes, we also see groundwater levels rise. And so that's why you can also see some inland effects that might not necessarily be directly related or connected.
Karen, the drainage from north comes through Fairview Street behind Irish's property. There's a swale there that we're forbidden to build on,
Right.
except the school system built across it because they were able to. So now, when we get big rain, we wind up with a lake behind our buildings.
That's a good point, Bob, because we had talked, when we did the spillway here, back in 2019. Benchmark has said, hey, eventually you wanna, because the school and the city and IBS all have this, and this property that also poses a flood problem up where you're at, and that's probably something we need to address in the future. But there's, to get all three parties together at the
There'd
same
be
time.
any way to get rid of
How
it.
about Blackbird? Is it Blackbird?
It's, yes, no,
No.
no, it's the high school.
The high
Not the high
Not like
school.
for the middle
It's
school.
it's kind of between Shea and Blackbird.
So
There's a spot where those properties meet up with the end of Fairview Street.
Our
Yes.
DPW building.
Got it, got it.
Yeah, and so we
If you go up Fairview and go on Irish's property and go around the back,
Okay.
you'll see the swale.
Isn't it kind of right where the bus garage building is?
That's
That's where
I
it
think that's the
starts.
structure that is the problem.
Okay, got it.
So, you're talking about a storm event, if it's also affecting the coastline, it's also affecting, the rain, the FEMA floodplain that we have here is built for more than 100 years, but if you're talking about other stronger storms, it's.
We're seeing communities getting the 100-year storm once every 10 years.
Mhm. Traverse City had 2 500-year events back to back a couple of years ago.
I don't hear Pure Michigan talking about this at all.
Yeah, they're just saying, come up, come up, come up.
Looks like it, 30 years, 40 years, so.
Okay, well, what I'm taking away from this is it's pretty scary. And something that we need to be thinking about. So in the new zoning ordinance, we did foresee some of this. John advised us, and we put in bigger setbacks in the lake. We put in the shoreline protection bill. That came from the Watershed Council. Thank you for your recommendations on that. So we've got some.
We got some going. We have
some things going.
Something coming for us.
We do, so that's great. Just probably outside of planning commission, the city better take a look at our property and our infrastructure and see if it's being harmed by other measures that have been taken. And then in any future planning for infrastructure, we ought to keep in mind high water levels. And then we could consider having an information session for property owners with the maps and, big boards that people could pour over. And we're not gonna have a lot of answers for them, but we could help distribute it. We could also reach out to the HOAs and resort associations, I suppose, as part of that process.
For me, the bigger issue is that all the water from Robinson Road this way drains this way into this town on its way to the lake. And I'm more afraid of that than I am of the big lake. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of water
Yeah.
moving this way.
Huge watershed.
After a good rainstorm.
Yeah.
You know, the watershed begins just north of Robinson Road.
And we have put in some efforts towards that. That's, this whole project here
Mhm.
was in regards to that. So we're certainly aware of it and we've made, I think, really good strides in the last few years to help address it.
A lot of this costs money, and that's
Yeah.
where, prioritize the money, and that's. You hope that the state steps in too a little bit, because this is affecting the coastline. Public resource for everyone.
But there's money out there to have your infrastructure looked at, to make sure that your pipes are sized properly. If you need more pipes, I mean, there's loan programs, there's money out there.
So with respect to the Emmett County updating the hazard mitigation plan, if you ever want FEMA money, you need to get your projects into that hazard mitigation plan.
You mean deal with the feds?
For the state.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, thanks.
but you can't get money unless it's in that plan.
Alright, so we need to take a look at that. And see if we do have any projects. So that's not strictly planning commission work, but it's city work. So, all right, well, you accomplished your purpose, John. You've got us.
Got you thinking.
Increased awareness and
No sleep tonight.
bit of concern.
I know.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you. And thanks folks in the audience for helping us think it through. Really appreciate it. So, all right, let's see, last thing on the agenda is member comments. I just have one announcement, interesting thing. A number of the planning commission people in the area are gonna get together and have coffee for the first time ever. So get to know each other. So just one or two people from some neighboring planning commissions.
Oh, for the neighboring townships.
Neighboring townships, yeah.
Right, we're talking about this board.
No.
I know, I was gonna say, Brian, how many can you do before it's a
No,
meeting?
Second and a half.
Trying to get it for next week, yeah,
Let us know.
yeah. I'll tell you what I learned. Could be interesting.
I'd like to offer as well, Gail Brown from the DDA has asked if I would put together kind of a walking tour of the downtown businesses to show them and walk around and have a discussion around signage.
Where the good sales are and.
Sure. So with that in mind, if any members of the planning commission would like to participate in that, we do have to be cognizant to make sure that we do not have a quorum of break it up into small groups or whatnot, but that way we can walk around to businesses, look at some various signages, what works, what doesn't work, things like that.
When are you gonna be doing that?
Gail is gonna organize that. I don't know when. I think she's thinking towards the end of summer when we can visit the businesses with minimal impact to what's going on at an off time early in the morning or
Are they gonna be
something.
looking at outdoor displays, goods? Because one of the concerns that we do have is about the sidewalks is a lot of the clutter, not allowing 6 foot space. We have the city's infrastructure, we have fountains,
There's a lot of
bikes, trees and stuff, and then you have the businesses.
There's
putting
a lot
stuff
of them that don't have.
So, yeah.
I think when we address the issue of outdoor display of goods, we really should be more holistic in looking at all of the things that are congesting the sidewalks, whether it's city related with garbage cans and bike racks, or business related regarding outdoor displays, sandwich boards, any other
There's
features,
benches, there's like
all of that stuff. And look at how much of it we like, what we don't like, and so that we can come up with something that works for everything, not just one specific issue. I think that makes sense.
Well, I think it's because if we're having an ordinance where, you're telling the businesses, well, we need to keep a 6 foot clear walkway, and then the city puts its own bike rack and there's not 6 feet, that's kind of, it's not leading by example, it's kind of.
You almost have to kind of adopt like a zone kind of thing where you've got the pedestrian zone. You've got your curb, you've got your furniture tree zone, you've got your pedestrian zone, and boom, you've got your building frontage, and everybody follows it.
Okay,
Spoken like a true.
more to think about. All right, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.